There were a couple golden rules when it came to progressing through that contraction continuum, going from motor control to strength endurance to max contraction, one specifically around the core, and then one around being able to progress some of those strength endurance ones independently. So
Yeah.
do you mind just reiterating the importance of, I guess, especially core motor control and having that down first?
Yeah,
Why is
definitely.
that the case?
Yeah, so what we talked about is kind of the core, and you always laugh when we say the core pattern, because obviously the core isn't a pattern of movement, but it's so important that we had to add it. It had to be one of the six. If we don't have motor control, or let's just call it control in general, or the ability to brace in the midline, if we don't have that established, everything else is moot. Everything else is a band-aid. Okay, so in part two, we talked about this example of someone that kind of skipped over that, right? They're like, it might be the person that has like a quote unquote bad back, and they have some core issues going on, and they're like, I'm not really going to address that because I'm really strong in other places. I have a really strong back squat. So they went from like establishing motor control in the squat, and then strength endurance. They're fine. They've been training for 10 years, and they're doing like Russian squat programs where they're hitting 95% and eventually 105% of their 1 rep max to set new PRs, and they never have that midline established. That's the person that might end up with the bad back. That's the person that might walk out and they might be going through that eccentric, and they pop what's like a typical injury you'll see there. Someone will say, oh, I have a slip disc, or I have 15 slip discs, or whatever the issue is there. Or they're like, technically you see them squat and you're like, you're really strong, but that just doesn't look good, man. Like you hit the bottom and you're kind of like folding like a pancake there, right? So they just like band-aid it up, and that leads to bad patterns, right, across the board, because they don't have that established when the load gets to those higher percentages. And for some people, it just leads to injury, and it leads to them kind of like getting out of fitness and exercising. And that's the person that's like, oh, I used to be so strong, and then I hurt my knee and my back, and I've been out. So they kind of like band-aid it up for the sake of just squatting a bunch of weight. And I know I kind of went deep in that one example, but that's someone that skips over the midline, right? So the the golden rule. Just make sure that you have your core motor control established before moving on to anything else. So you can train motor control in all patterns without having the core squared away. But if you don't have that squared away and you don't have motor control in the core, don't move on to training strength endurance and going after these strength endurance FMEs. Just be really patient and square that core away. And then when you move to strength endurance, make sure that you establish strength endurance in that core as well before you move on to max contractions anywhere else. So essentially, it's like nothing else moves beyond the core.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's kind of like how we laid it out in the class.
And just to reiterate, for the core, our motor control assessment, we've got 90 seconds in a side plank each side. I certainly, in the past, have back squatted people heavy without them being capable of doing a 90-second side plank. I know I've made that mistake before, and it does come back to bite you. It really does, and it's unfortunate. And then for strength endurance, we're looking at that strict knees to elbow. 6 reps?
So, 6 reps. Yeah, 6 reps.
Yeah, so making sure those two things are checked off. Now, let's say...
Oh, sorry, no, 5 reps.
5 reps.
Yeah,
5 reps. Thank you.
I was thinking of your prone rows in your prone rows in my head.
Let's talk a little bit about that incredibly strong individual who comes to a coach looking for programming. They want to get stronger. They want to keep working on their back squat 1RM. Coach takes them through OPEX move, and they can do like 33 seconds on their left side plank and 24 seconds on their right. How do you navigate that conversation with a client who does possess like great lower body strength, and ask them, let's take the time, let's roll things back a moment, let's take the time to progress the core before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be exceptions too, right? It's like, we have to, when we lay these FMEs out, it's like there's going to be someone that might have 33 seconds on the left side because they have a shoulder issue, or they have like something going on with the lower body where they can't stack their feet, or there might be something going on, and you use your let's just call it like you use common sense, and you find another way to test that core endurance, and they pass with flying colors and whatever your other assessment is. We just like the side plank. When we look at, 'cause we got asked the question, or I got asked the question a few weeks ago. It's like, why the side plank and why 90 seconds? So where that originally came from, and I remember James and I having this conversation. Stuart McGill did. He's the back guy, right? So he did a lot of he was involved in a lot of research around like lumbar stability and how the core and being able to brace is like step number one in having a stable lumbar spine. And through a ton of different exercises and a ton of different assessments, the thing that he kept coming back to was 60 seconds per side in the side plank was like, that was like the check off of like this person can brace appropriately. We upped the ante a little bit. We're like, let's go 90. It's more than 60, and we're not doing this just so people can brace. Like we're actually testing. Let's call it like, I know it's oblique specific, but we're testing overall core endurance. We want to make sure that someone has the stability through endurance in the core and they can hold their own body weight up for 90 seconds. So that's where that came from. So there are outliers, but if it is someone that's like 33 seconds on the left side and there's no other reason to that, they just don't know how to brace and they just have a weak core, I would just have a conversation around why it's important to shore up that core before we move on to other things. And I know I might think, things are easier than they actually are, but I think the typical person is going to understand the importance around core endurance or core strength and core endurance, or being able to brace the midline, and that being a prerequisite to back squatting a bunch of weight. If you like break it down to them in like very layman's terms, right? It's just going to click for most people. And if it doesn't, I would say that, you need to figure out why that person is so connected to like wanting to like back squat 1RMs and all of that. Like, what is their outcome? What is their end game? Because if someone is too weak to do that, and B, they can't connect the dots even after you connect them for them, it's like that person might have something else going on, and that conversation might lead a different way. But
Definitely.
yeah, just be transparent.